following conversation is offered for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended as medical, legal, or therapeutic advice, nor as a substitute for professional care. The views expressed are those of the participants and are shared to explore ideas, experiences, and perspectives. Welcome to The Future Reimagined, an exploration of how we move toward greater wholeness and harmony through open hearts and inspired imagination. Hi, and welcome to the Future Reimagined podcast. I'm your host, Danny O'Malley, and today's guests are at the forefront of trauma-informed education for facilitators, breathworkers, and ceremonial guides. We have Lena Skydancer and Joe Snyder here today. They're the co-creators of the Prepared Guide, which is a training program that's helping establish a high standard of medical and somatic education for people working with clients in non-ordinary states of consciousness. Lena brings nearly a decade of experience guiding deep transformational work with a foundation that weaves together Tibetan Buddhism, internal family systems, energy medicine, hypnotherapy, and psychedelic-assisted therapy. Her work is rooted in trauma resolution and nervous system stabilization with a strong emphasis on safety, discernment, and integration. She's guided hundreds of people through complex healing processes with a level of care and precision that reflects a deep respect for the medicine and the people she serves. And Joe spent more than a decade as a respiratory therapist, working in the ICU, the ER, and in neonatal settings. She now bridges that clinical expertise with somatic and ceremonial work, serving as a clinical educator, ketamine clinic manager, and somatic experiencing practitioner. Her work is focused on preparing facilitators to respond skillfully in high-stakes moments, weaving together medical knowledge with trauma-informed, heart-centered care. Lena and Joe, welcome to the podcast. How are you both doing today?
Thank you. Doing great. Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Also
How are you doing,
well,
Joe?
really well, really excited to be here with you and Lena today and talk about the training and just the psychedelic space in general. Yeah.
Yeah, so where are you guys both coming from, by the way?
I'm in San Diego, Southern California.
And I am here in Crestone, Colorado, southern area of the state. So,
Oh, beautiful area. Yeah, beautiful area, both of you guys. So I'd like to start our conversation if you could just orient us a little bit to your background and sort of your theoretical orientation and how you got into the psychedelic space in general. And Lena, if you want to start us out, that'd be awesome.
Sure. I was initiated into this work 10 years ago by accident, although we know that there are no coincidences. And prior to that, my background was I was heavily immersed in the Eastern cosmologies of the Yoga Sri Vidya tradition and Anuttara Tantra Yoga of the Vajrayana tradition. And in conjunction to that, I was teaching yoga and meditation and breath work, and I became a birth doula and a placenta medicine woman. So the entirety of my life was just this beautiful divine orchestration that gave me tools that now I incorporate in my offerings and my practice with my clients. So that's a little bit about me.
So you've been stewarding sacred spaces for a long time.
Yes, maybe eons of time.
Yeah, lifetimes. Yes, I love it. And what about you, Joe?
my path was definitely a little different, a little more Western, I would say. I started with my relationship with psychedelics personally at 17 years old, and that changed my life, changed my whole trajectory of where my life ended up today. And I spent a large amount of my time in my 20s really getting to know the medicines intimately, but not in therapeutic spaces. And I learned a lot in those more recreational and experiential psychonautical realms. And then during that time, I was also working as a respiratory therapist in ICU settings, primarily pediatric ICU, neonatal ICU. And yeah, all the while I had no tools for my own self. I was 22 when I started working in ICUs. And looking back, it was a big teacher. And then in 2019, I just knew I needed to kind of rearrange my career and my life because it wasn't supporting me in the ways that it had initially, and I didn't really know where I was going. And as Lena said, there's no accidents. I also kind of got initiated into this work not knowing that that's the path I was heading down. Met my mentors in 2018 in Sedona, did therapeutic work as the client with them, and then just realized how, I don't know, for me, I really wanted to help the medicines have safer containers than what I was brought up in, and help people have, yeah, just better support and knowledge and surfing the psychedelic waves. And ended up managing a ketamine clinic quite kismetly. Started as a medical assistant and was there for 2 years. And then during that time, I was training under my mentors and also um, working alongside a somatic experiencing practitioner who wanted to also do medicine work, and I was his female support. So that's really where the somatic experiencing part became very clear to me as far as a modality that I wanted to support with the psychedelics. And that's how I've ended up where I'm at today, all those different paths.
Mm. Yeah, so interesting. You and I have similar background, Joe, of just experimenting sort of recreationally and finding out over time, like, oh, there's a lot here that I'm not trained in, and there's like I need to be because the containers, like you said, that you were brought up in maybe weren't the safest or stewarded very properly, and like learned kind of the hard way through, I'm sure, a lot of challenging experiences that, oh, there's a different way to do this and to hold these experiences in a sacred container. So I share that with you. Also
So,
started my medicine experiences when I was about 17. How did you guys meet? How do you two know each other?
Lena, you
We
want to
met
field
through
that
a
one?
community. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if you wanted to field that question. So, yeah, it's perfect.
We met through a community of ethical and safe practitioners.
Mm, yeah. Okay, cool. Awesome. So, yeah, the Prepared Guide training program is obviously deeply heartfelt. It comes from a deep place of service, it seems like. And I love that you guys are doing that. I love that you're putting this together. And I'm really curious about the personal experiences that shaped your commitment to this trauma-informed somatic response work, also coming from, the lens of medical training, medical awareness. What really made you guys want to put this offering together?
I guess I'll go first. So I've been looking for a training like this for a really long time because I saw that there was a missing link, which was actually focused on the medical emergency and what actually happens physiologically with bodies, right? We can access altered states, and yet the body is still the body, right? And so it doesn't matter how far and deep we can unravel our psyche and how far and deep we can touch fingertips with God. If the body is responding in crises, most facilitators don't know how to respond. And fortunately, unfortunately, I had a medical crisis that I held a year and a half ago that really, really inspired me to reach out to Joe and collaborate on this training because there's nothing like it. Right. And most of the facilitators' field and trainings are really oriented around mystical, ceremonial aspects, therapeutic, transformational promises that psychedelics will change their life, which is all great. And also, they're not really focused on what happens when things become difficult, when there is complexity, when there is destabilization, or just medical complexity, right? So there can be an unconscious belief in our field that if the container is sacred enough, then everything will just work out, right? But our devotion and commitment to this work and our reverence cannot really replace the preparedness to actually hold a medical emergency. And so we started collaborating and we worked through the curriculum and realized that the nervous system is often a terrain that is missed in these trainings. So we really focus quite heavily on the nervous system regulation. Yeah. Joe, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, what Lena is talking about with her experience with holding a client in a medical emergency, and there not being a lot of training around that, that's true. I've undergone a traditional menteeship, and then I also did take like a course for entheogenic guides, and it was a very well-rounded course. And most trainings, really emphasize, hey, get your CPR, which is really important that everybody get their CPR training if you're holding these spaces. The problem and I didn't know this about my own experience, but what a gift to have 10 plus years of navigating really complex medical emergencies, because it is something that I don't think a lot of people in our spaces have backgrounds around. And I think because they're not oriented to the fact that sometimes the body can really come against challenge, that these things can happen in our spaces because we're giving things that put pressure on the cardiac system, the emotional system, the lungs, our neurochemistry, all kinds of different things that can happen in the space that can lead to a medical emergency. And unfortunately, fortunately, Lena experienced that firsthand. I have had a client have a seizure in the space, but we knew that was a known possibility with her, and we had a protocol in place to support her. And that made all the difference in the world, because we were prepared and we were ready. But most people don't think about that in our space because they haven't bumped into it yet. And that was what we wanted to help people be prepared for, that, likely you might never see one of these, but if you do, this training will hopefully give you the tools and the regulation to actually move through it. Like Lena said, when I sat down with the curriculum, we hadn't talked much about the nervous system at all. We talked about the medical response, and I kept thinking about, I don't know why, it just kept coming up from my own experience at the bedside. Like, no one told me how to regulate amongst somebody, having a cardiac event or bad car accident, and we're trying to triage them. There was so much overriding, there was so much compartmentalization, and no debrief either, that all that got really sticky within me. And then I thought, well, here we have this somatic experiencing lens we can bring into this curriculum to help facilitators not only respond medically and appropriately, but also do that from, we're not going to be completely regulated in an emergency, but we can at least soothe ourselves and stay grounded enough to save a life, by not getting stuck in freeze or stuck in chaos or, all of that. So all of that just felt really important. And we both have had experiences that showed us why this training is important. And, I think things are happening in our space that a lot of people aren't talking about, because it might press on the ego or press on the safety of their container or whatever the reason might be, but it's happening. We know from our communities that people have experienced this as well, seizures, aspiration, stuff like that. So, yeah, it was just very clear to Lena that like this needed to be born, and her coming to me and saying, "You want to do this?" and me saying, "Yeah, I do," and then not realizing what I was saying yes to. Um, but it's been deeply meaningful. So I'm so grateful for her vision, because it's really beautiful in this time in the psychedelic space where it's expanding and growing. It couldn't be more needed. So, yeah.
Yes, I fully agree with that. And I've definitely been in situations like that in group containers where, especially those emotional contagions can start to go around, and having a grounded nervous system as a facilitator or even as a participant, as a celebrant in that space, it's important to be able to stay grounded, because if one or two people can stay grounded, the whole container can stay that way. And it's also something that's really hard to train unless you've been in that situation. Like, we can talk about how to maintain a grounded nervous system, but it really takes being in a situation that requires it to show, oh, I do have that, and that takes a lot of practice. And so that brings me to my next question about why do you think this is a missing piece? And I wonder, like, sometimes, Joe, you mentioned there are things happening that not everybody is talking about, and I wonder if part of that is like we don't like we're in such a beautiful space of psychedelics re-emerging into our culture, and there is a talk about trauma-informed care and risk reduction and ethics and safety and all of that stuff, and it seems like, oh, we don't want to mess this up, like it's hard to talk about the hard stuff when things do go wrong, when destabilizing events happen or somebody gets injured or something like that. Do you think there's a bit of a fear of talking about the risks that are coming up, or why is this an undertrained area?
Do you want to go ahead?
You go, Lena.
I'll just, yeah, yeah, go for it, and then I can jump in. I think her and I both share this exact feeling about the things, so
Mm.
it'd be just repeating, but yeah.
Yeah. I think that people don't want to look into things that make them uncomfortable. It's just as simple as that. So, um, just because the medicine has impacted us so deeply that we believe in this work and we want to share it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be clinically prepared, because that clinical preparedness will not diminish the sacredness of the container that we are co-creating with our clients. It actually protects it, right? The sacred is not fragile, but the human body and our nervous system can be. And we see that again and again with destabilization or actual medical crises. So when we bring emergency response and screening and ethical structure and also nervous system literacy into this space that we're holding and stewarding, we're not just making the work sterile, right? It's not like we're looking for purity or perfection. We're actually making the container stronger. And I think that ceremony without that grounded preparedness can simply become naive. And I think that a lot of people walk into this work with a sense of naivete that everything will work out, right? And so we're really, the intention for this training is to create that bridge, that where we can still honor the mystery and we can still respect the body and the psyche and the nervous system, and actually like real world responsibility of how to hold a human being in a very vulnerable state. Yeah. And that's devotion, really. That's how we serve in devotion.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. And that's something that has come up in several circles that I've been in. Like when I did my facilitator training through InnerTrek in Portland, and I really liked their program. We didn't talk a ton about like what to do in a medical emergency, except for enact your emergency plan. But one thing we talked about at my practicum at the service center in Portland, and people were afraid of like the sterility, if and I don't mean to sound like they were this sterile service center, but some people were worried about like so much protocol getting in the way of the sacred. But for me, it was the complete opposite. I felt so safe and so held in this space that I was able to drop in a very deep way because I felt held, exactly like what you're saying, Lena. So thank you for mentioning that. That's important to me as well. Joe, what did you have to say?
I would, yeah, all of that, and I just add like it's the naivety, and also I don't know. I do think there is that protective piece, like you said. We want this space is just coming alive again and being accepted, and so I think people are um, cautious about that. But it's like you have to talk about the elephants in the room if you really want this to go well, and it's not because it's unsafe. Quite these medicines we know to be quite safe. However, how they sometimes interact with the body, we can't account for. So to not be trained is to not honor the space. And it's not to say that it's dangerous, because it's really not. We say this repeatedly in our training that hopefully you will actually never see one of these events in your space. But if you do, at least you have been oriented on how to find stability within you and also step by step how to respond to each different kind of medical or psychological stressor in the space from that grounded place. Knowledge is power, and it keeps us safe. And so I think people just don't know what they don't know sometimes until it happens, and then you're not prepared. And I'll be honest, this isn't a sexy conversation, and I feel like sometimes psychedelics kind of, because they are this newer way of healing and therapy and all these things, we're just not talking about what it looks like when things go really wrong. And that's kind of what we're here to do, is to shine a light on, like, yes, sometimes things go really wrong, and we want the people who come through our training to just be ready to hold that space. Hopefully, they never have to, but being prepared is part of the devotion and the ethical responsibility of this work, and we have to do it. We have to have the hard talks. Yeah.
Definitely. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to start this podcast, because I'm so dedicated to serving our community to bring awareness to these medicines and other sacred practices as well, in a safe, trauma informed way, that we can start to feel like the general public can start to feel safe addressing them. I still talk to people. I mean, I live in Idaho, so it's a little different than somewhere like Colorado, but I still talk to people daily who like don't know what the word psychedelic means, or don't. I try to describe to them what I'm into, what I'm studying, what I'm training, and it's like a different language to them. And so the more we can show up with safety, being well trained, knowing how to speak this language and make people feel safe and held in a sacred container, that's really what I'm in service to. So thank you for having this not sexy conversation. And also
Anytime.
it brings up it brings something else up for me, which is the importance of training for the medicine you're working with. And I'm wondering, being in Colorado, Joe, how you see that, because the training that I received was specific to facilitating psilocybin, and but then under the Natural Medicine Act, there's access to ibogaine and DMT and wachuma, I believe, and all of those medicines, from my perspective, require different training. They affect the body and the spirit very differently, and like I wouldn't feel comfortable serving somebody 5-MeO DMT or wachuma for that matter, but I do feel comfortable working with psilocybin. So how do you see, does the prepared guide training address that, and how do you see that showing up in the space? Like, do you find that people are unprepared as a guide because they're working with a medicine they don't know well enough?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, and thank you for asking it, because I think it's one that isn't really being talked about either. I definitely, it's my orientation, and I think I can speak for Lena too, that you only serve the medicines that you know. And so when we are working with people with the prepared guide, we specifically want to, in their application process, know what medicine they're serving, what they're training for, all of that. And then we really continue just to talk about that medicine as it pertains to the training with them, so they can bring their questions forward about, well, I serve this, what would that look like? Or Lena and I, with being facilitators of 5-MeO, that's a very different container and medicine to hold, and has a lot of different presentations to hold too. And so we do talk a lot about that in the training, which is good because it's big medicine, so you can kind of go from the biggest down to the quote unquote smallest. But what I talk about too is I've seen people get absolutely dysregulated with MDMA, and people talk about MDMA like it's kind of a, just a, a lighter medicine experience, but we don't know what we're going to touch with any of these medicines. And we have to be prepared for all of it. So, yes, I think two parts, really just maintaining your training that you've been trained on, and not trying to hold medicines that you don't know, because that's going to get everybody in trouble. And we really kind of champion that in the training. And also, it brings up for me too the reason to have mentorship and menteeship. We have a lot of trainings out there now, but not a lot of time in the spaces. And um, I I would love to see more time created for more hands-on before people are out administering different psychedelics. Yeah.
Lena,
Yeah.
do you have anything to add to that?
I do. I actually feel very passionate about this. What I'm seeing is the lack of mentorship in this field. There are a lot of trainings, weekend warrior trainings, even with 5-MeO DMT vape pens, and then vape pens at the end of the training are just being simply distributed, and people actually don't have a deep, intimate relationship with the medicine that they're serving. And just because they have a pen, it actually inherently makes them a facilitator, even though their readiness level may not be in par to actually serve this medicine, which is actually really big. And so, people can learn protocols and maps and contraindications and the template of the ceremonial structure, but facilitation is not just an intellectual skill. It's an embodied responsibility, and it really takes time. And a facilitator needs to be shaped over time through guidance and supervision and reflection and correction and actual lived experience, right? And like what Joe mentioned, and I really want to echo that we need to have a very deep, profound relationship with the medicines that we are serving, right? Because this work, yes, requires the nervous system capacity and humility at the same time, and discernment and relational maturity and actual ability to stay present when the field becomes really complex, right? So mentorship also, I believe, can show us our blind spots. Maybe a tendency where we lean towards rescue and saviorism, or to maybe even overdo or overperform, or maybe even where we collapse in a role of a facilitator, right? So I think that that's why mentorship is so essential, and it cannot be done over just a weekend training or even couple of months. Mentorship creates this beautiful living container for growth and accountability and refinement. So that's kind of a missing link as well.
Yeah, that's been really important for me, to go through the process to get licensed in Colorado. You do need 40 hours of consultation, and I'm in that process right now. And that group that we're in is so valuable, and I've learned so much just by listening to stories and being able to share vulnerably about places that I have maybe not shown up the best in, and been able to stay regulated or to hold the container in the best way. Um, is, do you mean mentorship though, as far as like in ceremony, like being an assistant for a while, or do you mean mentorship like consultation groups, or both?
Both. I think that, the template to how you're going to hold a ceremony is really important, but then the shadowing aspect of it and supervision is super important, and it cannot be done overnight. And it cannot be just shared over the screen, over a Zoom call.
Yeah.
So actual participation in ceremonies while you're watching and observing, you're apprenticing.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
echo that because, I'm part of a group of, um, yeah, other practitioners, and I will say that what I've noticed, and this is why I would love to also just a plug for um, underground practitioners and the therapeutic teams, different psychotherapists, psychologists, people who have licensure to work collaboratively, because I think there can be a little bit of a, well, I'm trained, I have this licensure. I know they do. They know the psychological piece, but what I'm noticing is those trainings for those therapists don't include a lot of their own medicine work, and or shadowing. And so they go in with this template of like a journey looks like you put on the eye mask and the music and you go on your journey and I'm just here. Um, but when you shadow and minty, you see that like, oh, there is a huge range of how people engage with medicine based on their emotional process, their
Mhm.
nervous system, their what they need in that moment, how the medicine is amplifying certain things. And it's not this cookie cutter protocol that some things are being trained as, and then these folks don't know what to do, or they find themselves frustrated because, well, the person wouldn't put on the eye mask and go in, and it's like, right, because that's not what they needed something else.
Mhm.
And so that's why that, I've been lucky enough, and I know Lena too, to be in a traditional mentorship for years and seeing many different presentations and learning how to roll with whatever is in front of us instead of wanting it to look like how we were shown in a training. And so, this is why doing our own work, whether that's, just going to therapy or sitting with the medicines ourselves and being guided by others, going through our own integration process makes us a better, safer facilitator or therapist. So I just can't understate the time and the space, as far as like really holding these medicines. It takes years, to really intimately know the space. Yeah.
Yeah, man, it really does. It's such a complicated um, skill, and I love being a student of it. And in my, I did go through a training program through Intertrek, and they did an amazing job. It's a 9-month program, and follows all the very strict protocol of getting licensed in Oregon and Colorado. And yet, there's still like in 9 months, you can only cover so much, and there's only a 40-hour practicum, where 40 hours of being in service to being in ceremony is like it's a lot of time, but not that much time. And there's so many different things that could happen in an experience, that it really does take such a long time to hone the skill. And there were many people who completed that training, did the practicum, and felt completely unprepared, just because they realized how big of a responsibility it is to tend containers like these and to hold people in these very tender places. Um, so yeah, it is amazing how long it takes to really hone these skills. And also, it's funny how it makes me feel grateful for those times when I was like 19 or 20 and just kind of exploring in a different way, and seeing, oh, like that can happen, oh, that can happen, oh, like seeing all of these things that you don't get exposed to in like a typical training program. So as hard as some of those experiences were, I do have gratitude for them. um,
Yeah.
so I was wondering, you guys talk about not compromising the sacred while introducing the clinical preparedness. So how do you hold how do you hold those perspectives simultaneously? We talked a little bit about it, but I'm just curious if you could open that discussion up a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Lena said it perfectly. It doesn't take away from the sacred, by having the clinical. I know because her and I are not clinical practitioners, we have our spaces that each have their own sacred rituals and just their therapeutic ceremonial space, and so that stays intact. And also, because we've got the training underneath of that, it's just in the background. It's not forefront. It's not like we're sitting there with white lab coats and, monitoring the heart rate the whole time and all of that. And I will say there's a place for that. As someone who spent 2 years in a ketamine clinic, I know darn well that half of the people that came to that kind of therapeutic modality came to it because that's what felt right and safest for them. If they were to step into my private home container, they might be like, I don't know about this. It might not be the container for them. So we really, again, it just goes to it's the knowledge underneath the sacred, and they're not separate. They're actually inextricably the same, connected and the same. And it's more, almost, it's more sacred when we're embodied and when we know how to respond. So yeah, that's kind of my answer. What would you add to Lena?
Yeah, I don't think they're the opposites at all. I think that the preparedness is actually giving us that solid foundation out of which we can actually invite the sacredness, the ceremonial aspects, and the mystery. And so we can hold both and not separate, right? What we see right now is that there's a lot of attention on the therapeutic aspects, right? But and even now, big pharma is trying to extract the sacred out of these medicines and create drugs that will still be as effective without actually altering the consciousness. But what are we doing here? We're actually stripping that sacred away from the deep transformation that can only happen in an altered state of consciousness. Right, so holding both the human body and the vulnerability of the human body and that real world responsibility of how to take care of the physiology while we actually allow a psyche to fly and soar and experience its vastness and its multidimensionality. So they happen symbiotically and at the same time.
Thank you for that perspective. And and I'm curious, so one thing that I'm really fascinated by is spiritual emergence and spiritual emergency. And I know that's one of the modules in your training at the Prepared Guide. I'm really curious. I mean, we could do a whole podcast on spiritual emergence, but I'm curious if you think the facilitators like theoretical or spiritual orientation affects how they field like somebody going through spiritual emergence, like if somebody with deeply held spiritual beliefs would sort of tend that differently than somebody who doesn't. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, I so we actually teach people how to track multiple layers at once. So we address all of those presentations, right? There is this spiritual layer, and then there is the psychological, psychic layer. There is a somatic layer. There is the medical layer, and also the relational layer, right? And spiritual emergence can look really, really intense. There may be grief and shaking and visions and fear and archetypal images that keep flooding the conscious and out of the subconscious. And there could be ego dissolution and overall just deep catharsis, right? And so not every emergency is going to require the same kind of response. And that's what we focus on. So we teach our facilitators not to immediately interpret everything as spiritual or as medical crises, because there's such nuance between the two, right? We actually teach them how to slow down, how to observe physiology, how to assess coherence, track respiration, breath, color, responsiveness, orientation, seizure like activities, overheating. I mean, I can go on and on and on, right? There are also psychosis risks. And all that to say that there is a distinction because if we over spiritualize or spiritual and medical emergency, then we can miss that momentum where when intervention is actually needed, right? But if we pathologize the spiritual emergence, then we can also interrupt something that is so meaningful and healing. So I think that discernment is everything.
Joe, what would you say?
Yeah, all of that. And Lena's her module is that, and she really does such a beautiful job of, pulling in, Groff's work and other folks who really talk a lot about what spiritual emergence or emergency is, and yeah, and basically how to hold that space and also hold ourselves in that, it can be uncomfortable to watch someone be uncomfortable. right? Or seem even unsound or dysregulated, or maybe a form of psychosis or fragmentation. But how to safely witness that with them, hold them in that. And then, of course, if indeed this is something that needs further care and support, then how to move that through the correct channels to get that person the support they need through their process. And something we talk a lot about is having a team around you that you can refer out to, that can help you with things that you aren't trained for, because we can't be trained in everything. And so to have a strong team around you to go to consult groups, to have a psychologist or a psychiatrist on your team that you can say, hey, had this ceremony, this person is experiencing this, and I'm a little concerned about where they're at. Can you help me? And yeah, having just that infrastructure for yourself as a facilitator to support your client. And of course, they might never know that you have that team around you, but you do. And that's really important. Just really, yeah, helping yourself first, but also making sure by helping yourself that you have the support tools you need around you, and how to navigate that, depending on what you're seeing. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where the integration can really become very important if somebody's going through an active spiritual emergence, emergency, anything like that. It's really, I'm curious what your perspective is on that. Do you guys train that in the prepared guide about how to adjust integration based on what comes up in the session, and how to hold somebody in a safe container in integration afterwards? Because that is like, I've seen it happen in the underground where somebody's going through some sort of emergence and then doesn't have the container of safety, is not well held, and then really has a hard time. I've gone through that, really having a hard time integrating profound realizations, like almost like destabilizing, like not sure how to direct your life afterwards, that kind of thing. Can you speak to the importance of integration in those situations?
I'll let you respond, Joe, because part of the curriculum that you cover is the debriefing. So I thought maybe.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That is actually, to Lena's point, one of the modules is debrief. And yes, the thing about debriefing is depends on, like you're saying, the level of, yeah, of fragmentation or psychosis or whatever in that realm of spiritual emergency that you're seeing, and how to support that. But yeah, how to create space, like something that we say to our folks is, some people, whether they're psychotherapists or underground practitioners, they might have a crazy schedule and they might not leave space for someone who is in crisis. And then what happens is that person ends up trying to manage that on their own, or feels abandoned or whatever. And so something we really talk about is making sure that if you're holding a ceremonial day, that whatever your process is with your client, that you're available. Like truly available to them, not just like, hey, I can check in with you for 5 minutes on a phone call, but like if someone is deeply destabilized, the way that I work, people come here and they're here with me for multiple days. So I'm just in, even in another building, or sometimes even in the same home, to be there in support. And I'll be there as much as I need to be until we're at a regulated, safe place. And other people have different processes, but if your person leaves, then yeah, how are you checking in with them the next day? How are you making sure that they're okay? What are you watching for? And then if they're not okay, what's your protocol? And really stressing how to create that protocol for their practice if they don't already have that. And like Lena said, the debriefing is equally as important. And we talk a lot about that as it pertains to, oh, there's been a medical emergency in our space, like maybe someone had a seizure, a cardiac event, aspiration, a stroke, maybe whatever it is, we go through an experience of holding that space, as does our team, any other co-facilitators, as does the client. And um, in medical for 10 years, the one thing that was missing was a debriefing. I would go remove life support from a person, and I would be required to go into the next room within minutes and give a breathing treatment and act like I'm I'm good, nothing, no big deal. And so we don't want that happening for people in our space. And so we talk a lot about what to do in the initial hours following an emergency in your space or a psychological emergency in your space, how to support yourself, like quite literally with different tools in that moment for immediate regulation. And then as a little more time has gone on, how to debrief with yourself and the group, how to even bring in another facilitator that wasn't there to hold the space for your debriefing, how to engage with your community for support, and then also how to bring your client back in and make sure that relationship is okay too, because that could have been really scary for them. That could have been really scary for a family member of theirs, who had to get that phone call of like, hey, Bob is in the hospital being checked out because this happened in the session today. There's a lot of emotional, uh, nervous systems to support following something like that. So we give folks a lot of different tools to, yeah, to really talk about what happened and to release it and to clear it and to keep good relationship with our clients. And that was just not something that happened, and I think is maybe happening more in medical, but it keeps us from holding the material in our bodies, because after, and Lena can speak to this, after her experience with her client, it took weeks to get herself back, and and we need to be back before we go hold another container, because we'll take that into the next space. So yeah, anything you'd like to share on that, Lena? I'm curious.
Yeah, thank you so much for mentioning the importance of preparation, because integration actually begins at preparation, right? And preparation changes the field before the crisis even arises. And it does not always have to look dramatic on the outside, but that preparation will prevent harm, because the facilitator will know when not to serve someone, for example, right? So it's not just a screening protocol or having the emergency plan or having the informed consent from their client. But also, if we have all those things in place, then if something does happen, we know how to act. Right, and so that's also part of the integration, is how well we are prepared to hold multiple different presentations.
Oh man, I'm so grateful for you guys being out there doing your work. You guys have so much integrity, so much skill and heart, and I'm seriously so grateful for the work you guys are doing with the prepared guide and in the rest of the work that you do. I can really feel it. Um, I'm curious, just as a last question here, um, where where you see the field of psychedelics going in the next 5, 10 years. Like, what's your sense of how things are evolving right now?
Whew, yeah. Well, my hope is that we mature into a beautifully cohesive ecosystem where facilitators are not working in isolation or from a place of like inflated self-authority. I think that I would really love to see where mentorship and peer reviews and supervision and continuing education and ethical accountability are clear standards in our work of care, respecting the body as much as we respect the sacred. And I think that there will be room for ceremony and clinical wisdom, indigenous wisdom, somatics, psychology, integration, community care without collapsing all of that into just one flat model, right? So we're so grateful and so humbled to be able to offer prepared guide training as one of the contributors to this future. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I feel curious about where it's going myself. I can see all the different sects, from the indigenous practices that are still being held to the clinical. And like, in the West, of course, we run everything through this clinical FDA lens, and it's got its positives and it's got its negatives. And I'm hopeful that we don't do to psychedelic medicine what we've kind of done with even marijuana. I would love to see this space scale to help as many people as possible and to be affordable, and to also be safe for giving people the option. Do you want to go to a clinical setting? Do you want to go to a more ceremonial, underground type of, like, what's your comfort, and then how to kind of bridge those and give people the option, so they can have the experience they're looking for. I know that's kind of like a big ask in the way that our systems are ran. But I would love to see more collaboration in that way. And I would love, speaking for the training of the prepared guides specifically, the medical piece, we didn't dive super deep into the way we address the medical, but we really spend a lot of time with a lot of different presentations. And we had one of my pediatric ICU doctors, who's just got a wealth of knowledge. He oversaw all the curriculum that I built on the medical piece because I was like, I wanted to stay within my scope as a respiratory therapist, and I am not a doctor. So he oversaw the training and, basically made sure everything that we're teaching is based in true medical appropriateness and response. And so I would love to see more unsexy conversations happening, to keep people safe. And, we kind of see our training as like, there's all these very comprehensive months long training, sometimes years long. But, this is kind of a little pocket of a different kind of perspective of training. And we would love to keep having conversations with other educational entities or training programs about how to incorporate what we're bringing, alongside of the training they're already offering, because ours is different, and it's not just medical, and it's not just the nervous system. It's a lot of other pieces too, but those are the pieces that are just not being covered. And I would love to see more of that acknowledgement, just so that it can keep all people who come to these modalities safe. So.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I was curious about that. If you were hoping to team up with other organizations and see, it seems like there's so many people wanting to collaborate, and I love I kind of love where things are going. I'm a little worried about where things are going. I don't know, like you said, Joe. I'm just curious, and trying to do my part to have these conversations and just spread positive awareness and talk to cool people like you who are doing great things. Yeah, thank you again. I really appreciate you both. When does your next module start, or where are you guys at right now do you have an active cohort going?
We do. We have a spring and fall cohorts, and so our next cohort will begin at the beginning of October, and the dates will be on the website.
Okay, and what's that website again? Thepreparedguide.org, is that correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay, awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much. Great to meet you, Lena. Great to meet you, Joe. Appreciate you being on the Future Reimagined podcast, and I hope to stay in touch with both of you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so
Yeah, you guys
much.
have a good one.